This isn't a game, kid. With a sneer, flight attendant Claire rips up 12-year-old Elijah's first-class ticket, assuming the young black boy couldn't possibly belong. Passengers watch silently, complicit in his humiliation. But Claire just made the career-ending mistake of assuming his place. Moments later, Elijah's father arrives, Darius Whitaker, the powerful CEO who owns the entire airline. Witness the viral confrontation that ignites a firestorm, exposing deep-seated racial bias, sham corporate diversity efforts, and family secrets rooted in past injustice. What happens when unchecked privilege crashes into unexpected power? Watch the explosive story unfold now. The hum of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport filled the air, a symphony of rolling suitcases, hurried footsteps, and distant boarding announcements. Elijah Whitaker stood at gate 37B, his small frame dwarfed by the towering digital screens displaying flight information. In one hand, he clutched a crumpled first-class ticket, in the other, a worn sketchbook brimming with designs for futuristic airplanes. His hoodie, faded but cherished, bore the words, "Stay Curious," stitched across the chest, a tribute to his late grandmother, Ruth Whitaker, who had always encouraged him to dream beyond limits. Elijah glanced around nervously. This was his first time flying alone, and though his father, Darius, had assured him everything would be fine, the weight of being surrounded by strangers made him uneasy. He adjusted the strap of his backpack and smoothed out the edges of the golden embossed ticket. It was a gift from Darius, a rare indulgence meant to make this trip special. Elijah wasn't just traveling to visit his grandmother's old neighborhood, he was gathering inspiration for a STEM competition where he planned to unveil his latest plane design. "Excuse me, young man." Elijah turned to see a flight attendant approaching him. She wore the crisp navy uniform of Horizon Airways, her name tag reading, Claire. Her smile was tight, almost forced, as she held out her hand. "May I see your ticket?" He handed it over without hesitation, pride swelling in his chest. For weeks, he'd imagined what it would feel like to sit in first class, to look down on the world from above. But Claire's expression changed the moment she saw the ticket. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and her eyes narrowed slightly. "This is a first-class ticket," she said, her tone clipped. "Yes, ma'am," Elijah replied softly, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "My dad got it for me." Claire flipped the ticket over, examining it closely. Then she looked back at Elijah, her gaze lingering on his hoodie before returning to his face. "And you're traveling alone?" "Yes, ma'am." She tilted her head, skepticism etched into every crease of her brow. "Do you know how much a first-class ticket costs, kid?" Elijah hesitated, unsure if he should answer. He nodded slowly. "It's expensive." "Exactly." Claire smirked, folding her arms across her chest. "So tell me, how does someone like you end up with a ticket like this?" Her words landed like stones, heavy and sharp. Elijah felt heat rise to his cheeks. "Someone like me," he echoed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, don't play dumb," Claire snapped, snatching the ticket back. Before Elijah could react, she tore it cleanly down the middle. The sound cut through the ambient noise of the terminal, drawing stares from nearby passengers. "This isn't a game, kid. You can't just waltz in here pretending to belong somewhere you don't." Elijah froze, staring at the shredded pieces of paper now dangling limply from Claire's fingers. Humiliation burned in his chest, hot and suffocating. He wanted to explain, to tell her that his father owned the airline, that he belonged here more than anyone, but the words caught in his throat. Tears pricked the corners of his eyes, but he blinked them away fiercely. He wouldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of her. Around them, phones began to emerge. Passengers filmed silently, their faces impassive masks. Some leaned closer, whispering behind cupped hands. Others simply watched, complicit in their silence. No one intervened. No one spoke up. Then, like a storm breaking, a voice thundered through the crowd. What the hell is going on here? Darius Whitaker strode toward the gate, his tall frame commanding attention. His tailored suit seemed incongruous against the chaos of the airport, yet there was no mistaking the authority in his presence. His dark eyes scanned the scene, landing first on Claire, then on Elijah, whose shoulders sagged with relief at the sight of his father. "Dad," Elijah whispered, his voice trembling. Darius knelt beside his son, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked, his tone gentle but laced with steel. When Elijah nodded, Darius rose to his full height, turning his gaze on Claire. "Who are you, and why are you harassing my son?" Claire's face paled, but she quickly masked her shock with defiance. I'm sorry, Mr. Whitaker, I didn't realize." "You didn't realize what?" Darius interrupted, his voice cutting through her stammering excuses. "That he's 12 years old? That he has every right to be here? That tearing up his ticket because of the color of his skin makes you no better than the people who tried to keep my mother off these planes decades ago?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone muttered, "Oh my God, that's him," while another passenger murmured, "This is going live right now." Phones continued to record, capturing every word, every flicker of emotion. Within minutes, the confrontation would go viral, sparking outrage across social media platforms under hashtags like #TravelingWhileBlack and #Horizon Airways shame. But for now, the moment belonged to Darius and Claire. Facing the CEO of Horizon Airways, Claire faltered. I thought he stole it," she finally managed, her voice barely audible. Darius stepped closer, his jaw clenched. "You thought wrong. And you will apologize to my son, not just privately, but publicly. Right here, right now." Claire opened her mouth to protest, but the sheer force of Darius's glare silenced her. Defeated, she turned to Elijah, forcing a brittle smile. "I'm sorry," she mumbled, her apology devoid of sincerity. Elijah met her gaze, his young face unreadable. After a long pause, he nodded once. It wasn't forgiveness, it was survival. As Darius ushered Elijah away from the gate, the boy slipped the torn pieces of his ticket into his pocket. They were jagged and uneven, but they fit together perfectly when pressed side by side. Just like the fragments of his dignity, Elijah thought bitterly. Broken, but still intact. The drive home was quiet, save for the soft hum of the car's engine and the occasional sniffle from Elijah. Darius kept his eyes on the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Anger simmered beneath his composed exterior, threatening to boil over at any moment. But for Elijah's sake, he held it in check. When they arrived at their modern Atlanta estate, a sprawling property nestled in a predominantly black neighborhood known for its affluence, Darius ushered Elijah inside. The house was a testament to success: sleek furniture, minimalist decor, and walls adorned with awards and accolades. Yet none of it mattered in that moment. "Come here," Darius said gently, guiding Elijah to the living room couch. He sat beside him, pulling his son close. "Talk to me. How are you feeling?" Elijah shrugged, avoiding eye contact. "Embarrassed," he admitted quietly. "Everyone was watching. Everyone heard her call me what she called me." Darius's jaw tightened. "She doesn't get to define you, Elijah. Do you hear me? People like her, they think they can decide your worth based on the color of your skin or the clothes you wear. But they're wrong. Your worth comes from within. From all the things you've worked so hard for." Elijah nodded, though doubt lingered in his eyes. "Why did she do it, Dad? Why did she assume I didn't belong?" Darius sighed, running a hand over his shaved head. "Because the world hasn't changed as much as we'd like to believe. There are systems in place, systems built on exclusion, that make it easier for people like her to judge without thinking. But we fight back, Elijah. We build something better. That's why I started Horizon. To give people like us a seat at the table. His words trailed off as memories surfaced. Memories of his own struggles, of the sacrifices his mother had made, of the battles he'd fought to get where he was today. Young Darius Whitaker crouched in the corner of a cramped apartment, clutching a burnt ticket stub. Smoke still lingered in the air, remnants of the fire that had destroyed his family's belongings after his mother, Ruth, was fired from her job as a flight attendant. Accused of insubordination during the Jim Crow era, Ruth had been labeled uppity for daring to challenge discriminatory policies. Her termination left the family destitute, forcing Darius to grow up fast. Years later, as a promising engineer, Darius faced similar prejudice. A racist boss dismissed him as unfit for leadership despite his talent. Fueled by anger and determination, Darius filed a lawsuit, and won. With the settlement money, he purchased a struggling regional airline and transformed it into Horizon Airways, naming it after the horizon his mother had dreamed of reaching. Yet even as Horizon grew into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, Darius carried the scars of his past. He kept the burnt ticket stub in a glass case in his office, a constant reminder of the barriers his family had overcome, and the ones that still remained. Back in the present, Darius reached for Elijah's hand. "I'm sorry I wasn't there sooner," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have protected you better. But I promise you this, we'll make sure nothing like that happens again. Not to you, not to anyone else." Elijah looked up at his father, searching his face for reassurance. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, Dad." As dusk settled over Atlanta, casting long shadows across the city, Darius resolved to take action. He couldn't let Claire's actions stand unchallenged, not when they represented a larger, systemic problem. Horizon Airways had been built as a beacon of hope, a symbol of progress. If it had strayed from that mission, then it was his responsibility to steer it back on course. In the corner of the room, Elijah's sketchbook lay open, its pages filled with visions of inclusive futures. Among the designs was a new logo for Horizon, a rising sun reimagined as a fist, a nod to resilience and resistance. Little did Darius know, those sketches would soon become the blueprint for change. Claire sat alone in her car, parked outside the airport employee lot. The fluorescent lights from the terminal cast a harsh glow through her windshield, illuminating the tremor in her hands as she gripped the steering wheel. Her mind raced, replaying the confrontation at gate 37B over and over again. She could still see Elijah's wide, wounded eyes staring up at her, feel the weight of Darius Whitaker's glare boring into her soul. For the first time in her 20-year career as a flight attendant, Claire felt untethered, adrift in a sea of consequences she hadn't anticipated. She reached for her phone, scrolling through social media feeds that were already ablaze with outrage. Videos of the incident dominated timelines, accompanied by scathing captions like #TravelingWhileBlack and #Horizon Airways shame. Commenters dissected her every word, labeling her racist, prejudiced, complicit. Some went so far as to demand her termination, while others defended her actions as standard protocol. "It wasn't personal," Claire muttered aloud, though the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "I was just doing my job." But deep down, she knew it had been personal. She'd let her assumptions dictate her behavior, assuming Elijah didn't belong in first class because of his age, his hoodie, his skin color. She'd dismissed him before giving him a chance to explain, reducing him to a stereotype, a thief, an imposter. And now, those assumptions had cost her more than just her pride. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was Marcus, her husband, calling for the third time that evening. Claire hesitated before answering, knowing he'd seen the videos too. When she finally picked up, his voice came through tense but controlled. "Claire, what happened?" he asked, skipping pleasantries altogether. "People are saying you tore up some kid's ticket because he's black. He's 12 years old." Claire shot back, defensive. 12. What kind of parent lets a kid travel alone with a first-class ticket? Of course I thought something was off. That's not the point, Marcus replied sharply. The point is, you humiliated him in front of everyone. You made assumptions about him based on how he looked. That's racism, plain and simple. No, it's not. Claire snapped, slamming her hand against the dashboard. You weren't there, Marcus. You don't know what it's like to deal with passengers who think they can walk all over you. I've had kids try to sneak into first class before, okay? This isn't the first time someone's tried to pull a fast one. Marcus sighed heavily on the other end of the line. So you're telling me if that boy had been white, you would have done the exact same thing? Claire opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. The truth was, she didn't know. Maybe she would have given a white child the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she wouldn't have questioned their ticket or assumed they were lying. But admitting that, to herself or to Marcus, felt like conceding defeat, like acknowledging a part of herself she didn't want to confront. I'm not a bad person, she whispered, more to herself than to him. I work hard. I've dedicated my life to this airline. My mom was a flight attendant, and her mom before her. We're part of Horizon's legacy. Doesn't that count for anything? Legacy doesn't excuse wrongdoing, Marcus said firmly. Look, I get it. You're scared. But doubling down isn't going to help. If you want to fix this, you need to take responsibility for your actions. Apologize sincerely, not because you have to, but because it's the right thing to do. Claire stared out the window, watching planes take off and land in the distance. The horizon stretched endlessly beyond them, vast and indifferent. She wanted to believe Marcus was wrong, that she could ride out the storm without making amends. But the reality was undeniable. Her career, and perhaps her marriage, hung in the balance. Back at Horizon Airways headquarters, whispers of discontent rippled through the corridors. Employees gathered in break rooms and hallways, discussing the viral video and its implications. Many expressed outrage over Claire's treatment of Elijah, but others remained silent, unwilling to jeopardize their positions by speaking out. In the Human Resources Department, files chronicling years of complaints against Claire began to surface. Former colleagues described incidents where she had singled out passengers of color, questioning their tickets or seating assignments under the guise of following protocol. Managers had repeatedly dismissed these grievances, chalking them up to personality conflicts rather than systemic issues. One such complaint came from Tasha Monroe, a former gate agent who had worked alongside Claire for 5 years. In a damning memo submitted to HR 3 years prior, Tasha recounted an incident involving a black passenger wearing a Harvard sweatshirt. Claire had approached the man, sneering, "That shirt must be fake. You don't look smart enough to go there." The passenger filed a formal complaint, but when Tasha corroborated his account, both were reprimanded for creating conflict among staff. Tasha's story gained traction online after the video of Elijah went viral. Journalists dug deeper, uncovering a pattern of discriminatory behavior that extended far beyond Claire herself. Former employees spoke of toxic work environments where racial biases were normalized, where diversity training sessions were treated as performative checkboxes rather than meaningful interventions. Darius Whitaker reviewed these findings in his office late into the night, anger simmering beneath his composed exterior. He had always prided himself on building Horizon as a model of inclusivity, yet the evidence suggested otherwise. His company had failed, not only Elijah, but countless others who had endured similar indignities in silence. As dawn broke over Atlanta, Darius made a decision. He called an emergency meeting with Horizon's executive team, presenting the unearthed documents and demanding accountability. "We can't keep sweeping this under the rug," he declared, his voice steady but resolute. "If we're serious about change, we need to start by addressing the rot within our own ranks." The board members exchanged uneasy glances, their usual platitudes falling flat in the face of irrefutable proof. One by one, they nodded in agreement, though skepticism lingered in their expressions. Darius knew the road ahead would be fraught with resistance, but he also knew it was a battle worth fighting, for Elijah, for Ruth, for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. By mid-morning, the hashtag #FlyForElijah had exploded across social media, galvanizing activists and allies nationwide. Calls for protests outside Hartsfield-Jackson Airport spread rapidly, drawing attention not only to Claire's actions but also to the broader issue of systemic racism in air travel. Flyers circulated online, urging participants to wear black and carry signs bearing messages like, "Privilege doesn't apologize, it deflects," and "Systemic racism takes us lower." When Darius arrived at the airport later that afternoon, he found the scene transformed. Hundreds of protesters filled the plaza outside Terminal A, their voices rising in unison as chants echoed through the cavernous space. Signs depicted reimagined versions of Horizon's logo. A rising sun morphed into a clenched fist, symbolizing resistance and resilience. Among the crowd stood Elijah, clutching a handmade sign that read, "Never fold." Darius approached cautiously, unsure of how he would be received. To his surprise, many protesters greeted him warmly, shaking his hand and thanking him for speaking out. Others, however, eyed him skeptically, holding banners emblazoned with slogans like, "Performative allyship isn't enough," and "Sell Horizon, build equity." A young activist named Simone stepped forward, microphone in hand. "Mr. Whitaker," she began, her tone measured but firm, "we appreciate your public support, but we need more than apologies. We need action. Will you commit to dismantling the systems of oppression within your airline?" Darius hesitated, aware that his response carried immense weight. "Yes," he said finally, his voice carrying over the din, "I will do everything in my power to ensure this never happens again, not just at Horizon, but across the industry. But I can't do it alone. I need your help." The crowd erupted in cheers, though skepticism lingered in the air. Protesters pressed forward, sharing stories of their own experiences with racial profiling while traveling. One woman recounted being removed from a flight for wearing a hijab, another described being denied access to a lounge despite having a valid membership. Each tale underscored the pervasive nature of discrimination in aviation, reinforcing the urgency of reform. Amid the chaos, Elijah wandered toward a quiet corner of the plaza, sketchbook in hand. As he flipped through its pages, inspiration struck. He began sketching a new design for Horizon's fleet, a sleek, futuristic plane featuring accessible seating for disabled passengers, gender-neutral restrooms, and solar panels integrated into the wings. In bold letters across the fuselage, he wrote, "Horizon 2.0, imagining a future where inclusivity wasn't an afterthought but a cornerstone of innovation." Meanwhile, Darius engaged with union leaders and grassroots organizers, listening intently to their demands. They called for transparency in hiring practices, mandatory bias training led by experts, and financial reparations for victims of discrimination. By the end of the day, Darius had committed to implementing several key reforms, including establishing an independent oversight committee to monitor progress. As the protest wound down, twilight settled over the city, casting long shadows across the terminal. Elijah joined his father, showing him the sketches he'd created during the rally. Darius studied them closely, pride swelling in his chest. "This is incredible," he said softly, placing a hand on Elijah's shoulder. "You're designing not just airplanes, but a better world. Keep dreaming, son. Together, we'll make it happen." Behind them, the horizon glimmered faintly, a reminder that even in darkness, light could still break through. The days following the protest at Hartsfield-Jackson blurred into a whirlwind of media appearances, internal investigations, and mounting pressure from every direction. Darius Whitaker found himself caught in the eye of the storm, juggling his roles as CEO, father, and reluctant public figure. While Horizon Airways scrambled to contain the fallout, Darius wrestled with an increasingly urgent question: could he truly reform an institution built on exclusion, or was it beyond saving? One evening, after another grueling day navigating boardroom politics and televised interviews, Darius retreated to his childhood home, a modest brick house tucked away in a historically segregated neighborhood. The visit had been Elijah's idea. "You always talk about Grandma Ruth," the boy had said earlier that week. "Maybe seeing her place will help you figure out what to do next." Darius hadn't planned to go. It felt indulgent, even selfish, given everything happening, but something in Elijah's earnest expression stopped him from saying no. Now, standing on the creaky porch of the house where he'd grown up, Darius felt the weight of memory pressing down on him. The chipped paint, the sagging roof, the rusted mailbox, all bore silent witness to the sacrifices his mother had made. Inside, the air smelled faintly of mildew and nostalgia. Darius wandered through the small living room, running his fingers over faded photographs and yellowed newspaper clippings tacked to the walls. One photo in particular caught his eye, Ruth Whitaker in her flight attendant uniform, smiling broadly despite the hardships she endured. Her badge gleamed proudly against her lapel, a testament to her resilience in the face of systemic discrimination. He pulled out his phone and dialed Marcus, Claire's husband and a union leader whose voice had grown increasingly critical in recent days. When Marcus answered, Darius cut straight to the point. "I need your help," he said, his tone uncharacteristically vulnerable. "Not just for Horizon, but for everyone who's ever been hurt by this system. I want to make real change, but I can't do it alone." Marcus hesitated before responding. "You realize this isn't going to be easy, right? People like Claire, they're symptoms of a much bigger problem. Fixing Horizon means dismantling decades of rot." "Are you ready for that?" "I don't have a choice," Darius replied. "If I walk away now, I'm no better than the people who let my mother down all those years ago." Back at Horizon headquarters, tensions reached a boiling point during an emergency board meeting. Executives argued fiercely over how to address the growing crisis, their voices ricocheting off the glass walls of the conference room. Some advocated for swift, cosmetic changes, rebranding campaigns, superficial diversity initiatives, while others pushed back, insisting that meaningful reform required radical restructuring. "We're hemorrhaging customers," one board member warned, gesturing to a report showing plummeting ticket sales and canceled partnerships. "At this rate, we'll lose half our market share within months." "And whose fault is that?" countered another, slamming their fist on the table. "Decades of ignoring complaints, sweeping racism under the rug. We've been complicit in creating this mess. If we don't own up to it now, we'll never recover." Darius listened silently, letting the debate rage around him. When the room finally fell quiet, he stood, addressing the group with a calm ferocity that silenced even the most vocal dissenters. "What happened to Elijah wasn't an isolated incident," he began. "It was the culmination of years of neglect, of choosing profit over equity, convenience over justice. We can't keep pretending otherwise." He slid a folder across the table, its contents detailing the numerous complaints against Claire and other employees, along with evidence of systemic bias embedded in Horizon's policies. "This is who we are right now," he continued. "But it doesn't have to be who we become. Starting today, we implement mandatory bias training led by external experts, not some checkbox exercise, but real education. We overhaul our hiring practices to prioritize diversity and inclusion. And we establish an independent oversight committee to hold us accountable." The board erupted into murmurs, some nodding in agreement while others exchanged skeptical glances. One executive raised a hand. "And what about Claire? She's suing us for wrongful termination. What message does firing her send?" Darius's jaw tightened. "Firing her sends the message that racism has no place here. That we value integrity over optics. Yes, she's suing us, and yes, it's going to get ugly. But if we back down now, we're telling the world that conditional respect is acceptable. That privilege determines accountability. I won't let that happen." His words hung heavy in the air, punctuated only by the soft hum of the overhead lights. For the first time in weeks, the board seemed united, not in agreement, but in recognition of the stakes. They adjourned the meeting with tentative nods, leaving Darius to sit alone in the empty conference room, staring at the city skyline beyond the window. Later that night, Darius returned to his childhood home, carrying a box of old family mementos he'd retrieved from storage. As he unpacked them in the dim light of the living room, he came across a small, burnt ticket stub, the same one he'd kept in his office for years. Holding it in his hands, he felt a pang of guilt sharper than anything he'd experienced since becoming CEO. For so long, he believed building Horizon was enough, that success could heal the wounds inflicted by systemic racism. But now, surrounded by the ghosts of his past, he realized how wrong he'd been. Success without equity was hollow, a mirage designed to distract from deeper truths. He thought of Elijah, of the torn pieces of his tickets still tucked safely in his pocket, and vowed to do better, for his son, for his mother, for everyone who deserved more than broken promises. As dawn broke over Atlanta, Darius sat at Ruth's old kitchen table, penning a letter to Horizon's employees. In it, he acknowledged the company's failures, apologized for its shortcomings, and outlined concrete steps toward meaningful reform. It was a risk, one that might alienate shareholders or invite further scrutiny, but it was also a reckoning. By releasing security footage of the incident alongside the letter, Darius ensured there would be no turning back. The truth would see the light of day, however painful it might be. The release of the security footage ignited a firestorm. Within hours, the video dominated headlines, sparking renewed outrage and calls for accountability. Protesters gathered outside Horizon offices nationwide, chanting slogans like "Systemic racism takes us lower" and "Horizon must fall." Meanwhile, conservative pundits seized on the controversy, framing Claire's lawsuit as a battle against cancel culture and political correctness. Amid the chaos, allies began to emerge within Horizon itself. Employees frustrated by years of unchecked discrimination formed a coalition called #EquityInSkies, demanding transparency and action. Among them was Tasha Monroe, the former gate agent whose complaint against Claire had been dismissed years earlier. She became a vocal advocate for reform, organizing town halls and workshops aimed at fostering dialogue and understanding. One evening, Darius hosted a fireside conversation at his estate, inviting key stakeholders, including Marcus, Tasha, and several grassroots organizers, to discuss the path forward. Gathered around a crackling fire pit, they shared stories, fears, and hopes for the future. "It's not enough to apologize," Tasha said, her voice steady but impassioned. "We need systems in place to prevent this from happening again. Bias training is great, but it's meaningless without accountability." Marcus nodded in agreement. "And accountability starts at the top. If leadership isn't willing to confront its own biases, nothing will change." Darius leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Then tell me what accountability looks like," he said. "Give me specifics." "I'm listening." The group spent hours brainstorming solutions, from implementing blind recruitment processes to establishing anonymous reporting channels for employees and passengers alike. They agreed that progress would require patience, persistence, and unwavering commitment from everyone involved. As the night wore on, Elijah joined the group, sketchbook in hand. He showed them his latest design for Horizon 2.0, explaining each feature with infectious enthusiasm. The plane represented more than innovation, it symbolized hope, possibility, and the belief that a better future was within reach. When the gathering ended, Darius walked Elijah back inside, pausing to gaze up at the stars scattered across the sky. "Do you think we can fix this, Dad?" Elijah asked softly. Darius smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "I don't know, kiddo. But I promise we'll try." Together, behind them, the horizon stretched endlessly, a reminder that even in darkness, light could still break through. The days following the fireside conversation marked a turning point for Horizon Airways. Darius Whitaker, now fully committed to dismantling systemic inequities within the company, announced sweeping reforms that went beyond performative gestures. He unveiled a $10 million scholarship fund aimed at supporting underrepresented youth pursuing careers in aviation, engineers, pilots, flight attendants, and designers alike. The initiative, named Ruth's Rising Stars, in honor of his late mother, sought to create a pipeline of diverse talent while addressing decades of exclusionary practices. But not everyone welcomed the changes. Conservative media outlets lambasted Darius's efforts as woke pandering, accusing him of prioritizing political correctness over profitability. Fox News ran segments questioning whether #FlyForElijah protesters were undermining free speech, while pundits speculated about the financial viability of such ambitious programs. Meanwhile, Claire's wrongful termination lawsuit gained traction among critics who framed her as a victim of cancel culture rather than a perpetrator of bias. Despite the backlash, Darius remained resolute. In a live-streamed address to Horizon employees and customers, he acknowledged the challenges ahead but emphasized the importance of staying true to their mission. "Reform isn't easy," he said, standing before a backdrop emblazoned with the rebranded Horizon logo, a rising sun transformed into a clenched fist. "It requires courage, sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to justice. But if we want to build something better, if we want to take this airline higher, we have no choice but to break the mold." Internally, Horizon began implementing mandatory bias training led by external experts. Employees participated in workshops designed to unpack implicit biases, challenge stereotypes, and foster empathy. Tasha Monroe, whose story had inspired many to speak out, became a key facilitator, sharing her experiences to humanize the impact of discrimination. Though some staff members grumbled about the sessions being too intense, others expressed gratitude for finally having space to confront uncomfortable truths. Meanwhile, Elijah continued to channel his emotions into creativity. His sketches for Horizon 2.0 evolved into detailed blueprints, complete with specifications for eco-friendly materials, accessible seating arrangements, and innovative safety features. One evening, while working on his designs, he decided to incorporate a subtle nod to resilience. Every plane would feature a small compartment labeled "Never Fold," symbolizing the strength required to navigate hostile skies. As the weeks passed, Horizon's leadership team worked tirelessly to rebuild trust, not just with passengers but also with its workforce. Union leaders like Marcus played a crucial role in bridging gaps between management and frontline employees, advocating for policies that prioritized equity without compromising job security. Slowly but surely, a sense of cautious optimism began to take root. Yet even amidst these strides, doubts lingered. Could a system built on exclusion ever truly be reformed? Or was Darius fighting a losing battle against forces far greater than himself? Claire's wrongful termination lawsuit unfolded like a courtroom drama, drawing national attention and reigniting debates about privilege, accountability, and conditional respect. The trial took place in a packed Atlanta courthouse, with reporters and activists jockeying for seats. Cameras rolled as lawyers delivered opening statements, painting starkly opposing portraits of Claire's actions. On one side, Horizon's legal team argued that Claire's behavior constituted gross misconduct, citing years of ignored complaints and documented incidents of discriminatory conduct. They presented testimony from former colleagues who described her as dismissive and prejudiced, often targeting passengers of color under the guise of following protocol. Security footage of the incident at Gate 37B served as damning evidence, capturing Claire's sneer and Elijah's humiliation in vivid detail. On the other side, Claire's defense attorney portrayed her as a scapegoat for systemic failures, claiming she had simply been doing her job. They highlighted her long tenure at Horizon, framing her as a dedicated employee caught in the crossfire of a public relations nightmare. Claire herself testified tearfully, insisting she hadn't known Elijah was Darius Whitaker's son and would have acted differently if she had. Her comments sparked outrage online, with critics arguing it underscored the very problem at hand: respect contingent upon status or privilege. Throughout the trial, Elijah avoided watching coverage, focusing instead on his STEM project. But the case loomed large in his mind, a constant reminder of the hostility he'd faced. One afternoon, while sketching a new design, he asked his father, "Do you think she really believes what she's saying?" Darius sighed, setting down the report he'd been reading. "I don't know, Elijah. Some people are so used to seeing the world a certain way that they can't imagine anything different. It doesn't excuse what she did, but maybe understanding why she thinks that way will help us figure out how to change it." The verdict came after 3 tense weeks of deliberation. The jury ruled in favor of Horizon, finding Claire guilty of racial discrimination and upholding her termination. While the decision brought a measure of vindication, it also left lingering questions about whether justice had truly been served. Claire vowed to appeal, doubling down on her narrative that she was being unfairly targeted. In the aftermath, conservative commentators seized on the ruling to critique movements like #TravelingWhileBlack, arguing that calls for accountability stifled free expression. Progressive voices countered that accountability wasn't oppression, it was a necessary step toward equality. The polarized reactions underscored the deep divide still plaguing society, even as Horizon tried to move forward. For Darius, the trial reinforced his resolve to push for systemic change. He knew reform wouldn't happen overnight, but each victory, no matter how small, was a step in the right direction. At the same time, he couldn't shake the feeling that Horizon itself might be irredeemable. Despite all the progress they'd made, the cracks in its foundation ran too deep. Was it possible to build something entirely new? One evening, Darius joined Elijah in the workshop where the boy spent hours perfecting his designs. Spread across the table were pages of intricate sketches, notes scrawled in the margins detailing everything from aerodynamics to sustainability. As Darius flipped through the drawings, he paused at one particular blueprint, a sleek, futuristic plane adorned with the words Horizon 2.0 across its fuselage. "This is incredible," Darius said, his voice tinged with awe. "You've thought of everything." Elijah grinned, his eyes lighting up. "It's not just a plane, Dad. It's a promise to make flying fair for everyone. No matter who you are or where you come from." Darius placed a hand on his son's shoulder, pride swelling in his chest. For the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe Horizon couldn't be saved, but perhaps something better could rise from its ashes. Something built not on exclusion, but on inclusion. Not on fear, but on courage. Together, they added a final touch to the design, a small emblem near the tail, shaped like a rising sun morphed into a fist. Beneath it, they inscribed a single phrase: "Never fold." The final days of Darius Whitaker's tenure as CEO of Horizon Airways were marked by a quiet resolve, a sense that he was stepping off one path to forge another entirely new one. The company had undergone significant changes in the wake of the scandal: mandatory bias training programs, revamped hiring practices, and the establishment of an independent oversight committee. But Darius couldn't shake the feeling that these reforms were merely band-aids on a wound too deep to heal. He knew Horizon had been built on foundations of exclusion, its legacy intertwined with systemic racism. To truly create something equitable, he realized, he would need to start from scratch. In his office on the top floor of Horizon headquarters, Darius sat surrounded by boxes half-packed with mementos from his decades-long career. Among them was the burnt ticket stub from his mother's wrongful termination, a relic of pain and resilience that had guided him through every decision. Across the desk lay Elijah's sketches for Horizon 2.0, each page brimming with innovation and hope. For hours, Darius flipped through the designs, tracing the lines of sleek fuselages and eco-friendly engines. These weren't just airplanes, they were blueprints for a future where everyone could belong. Elijah joined him later that evening, carrying a fresh sketchbook filled with even more ideas. "I've been thinking," the boy began, plopping down in the chair opposite his father. What if we didn't fix Horizon? What if we started over? Darius raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Started over how? Like this. Elijah slid a drawing across the desk. It depicted not just a single plane but an entire fleet, emblazoned with the rebranded logo, a rising sun morphed into a fist. Beneath it, bold letters spelled out, Horizon 2.0. It wouldn't just be about flying places, Elijah explained, his voice animated. It'd be about building connections, breaking barriers. We could make it affordable for low-income families, prioritize accessibility, hire people who look like us, and me, and give them real opportunities. Darius leaned back in his chair, considering the proposal. The idea wasn't entirely far-fetched. With his resources and influence, he could fund such a venture. But starting over meant walking away from everything he'd built, risking failure after years of success. Still, the thought ignited a spark within him, a chance to honor Ruth's memory in a way that transcended corporate apologies or token gestures. Over the next few weeks, Darius quietly assembled a team of trusted allies, engineers, designers, activists, and educators, to flesh out Elijah's vision. They held brainstorming sessions in his workshop, transforming the space into a hub of creativity and collaboration. Each meeting brought new insights: solar-powered planes, modular interiors to accommodate disabled passengers, partnerships with historically black colleges to recruit talent. Every detail reflected a commitment to equity and inclusion, principles sorely lacking in traditional aviation. Meanwhile, Horizon Airways announced plans to sell underperforming assets and streamline operations, signaling a shift toward sustainability. While some interpreted this as a retreat, others saw it as a reinvention. Publicly, Darius framed the move as necessary for long-term growth. Privately, he used the proceeds to seed funding for Horizon 2.0, ensuring the project would have the financial backing it needed to succeed. As news of his departure spread, reactions were mixed. Industry insiders praised Darius for his transparency and leadership during a tumultuous period. Activists celebrated his willingness to step aside rather than perpetuate harmful systems. Yet detractors accused him of abandoning ship, suggesting his actions were motivated by guilt rather than genuine conviction. Darius ignored the noise, focusing instead on the work ahead. On the eve of Horizon 2.0's official launch, Darius stood beside Elijah at a press conference held in Atlanta's historic Auburn Avenue district, a neighborhood once known as the heart of black wealth and culture. Behind them loomed a prototype of the first plane, its sleek design gleaming under spotlights. Reporters crowded around, cameras flashing as they captured the moment. "This isn't just about building better airplanes," Darius said, addressing the audience. "It's about building a better world. A world where no child is humiliated for daring to dream, where no parent has to fight for their child's right to belong. Horizon 2.0 represents our commitment to that vision." He gestured toward Elijah, who stepped forward shyly but confidently. "My son inspired this journey," Darius continued. "His resilience reminded me that progress isn't possible without imagination, and that sometimes, you have to tear down what exists to build something stronger." Elijah smiled, holding up his sketchbook. "We're calling it Never Fold," he said, pointing to the emblem near the tail of the plane. "Because no matter what happens, we keep going. We never stop trying to take ourselves higher." The crowd erupted in applause, cheers echoing through the night. As reporters rushed forward to ask questions, Darius slipped away, leaving Elijah to bask in the spotlight. He wandered to a quiet corner of the venue, pulling out his phone to check social media updates. On Fox News, Claire's lawsuit trended alongside hashtags like #BlackInnovation and #EquityInSkies. Conservative pundits criticized the launch as anti-capitalist, while progressives hailed it as a model for transformative change. But Darius didn't linger on the headlines. Instead, he scrolled through photos of the prototype, marveling at how closely it resembled Elijah's original sketches. Then he opened a text thread with Marcus, typing a simple message: "Thank you for believing in us." As dawn broke over Atlanta, casting golden light across the city, Darius found himself staring at the horizon, the same horizon his mother had dreamed of reaching all those years ago. It stretched endlessly before him, vast and full of possibility. For the first time in months, he felt at peace. Yet even as hope filled the air, a haunting question lingered in his mind: can a system built on exclusion ever truly take us higher? Back in the workshop, Elijah sat alone, sketching new designs for Horizon 2.0's next generation of planes. His notebook overflowed with visions of inclusive futures: classrooms suspended mid-air, hospitals accessible to remote communities, cities connected without borders. In the corner of one page, he wrote a single phrase beneath a rough outline of a rising sun turned fist: "Higher together." Outside, the world buzzed with anticipation, eager to see whether Horizon 2.0 could live up to its promise. And though challenges undoubtedly lay ahead, Elijah believed, deep in his heart, that this time, they might actually get it right.